You're listening to Next Pitch, the student-athlete playbook for parents raising tomorrow's athletes.
Hi there, my name's Anthony Leveritz. I am the host of the Next Pitch podcast. My producer is Jason Cardona. You can't see him, but trust me, he's here. We are launching a new podcast. This will be a journey through the life cycle of a student athlete, trying to cover multiple phases, a really holistic approach from getting involved to being a student athlete all the way through what's it like to be recruited potentially and be a professional athlete, and what does that look like and everything in between. Hopefully provide you with great information for both athletes, coaches, and parents. And we are we're excited to be doing this and hope to have a great impact on our listeners. Today, we are going to talk about being a high school student athlete. What's it like to be a multi-sport student athlete in high school? We talked about this with our youth segment, but what is it like to specialize when you get in high school? Should you start specializing? If I'm a 3-sport athlete, should I drop 1 or 2 and just focus on 1? And then if I am a high-level athlete in high school, what is my game plan for the future? What does that look like? How do I put a plan together to be either a multi-sport athlete and be great at one, or in general, what is that game plan? And we'll dive deep into that conversation with our guest today, which brings me to my guest, Alex Brink, former NFL football player, played in the CFL as well, Washington State University and Sheldon High School, owns eForce Sports, and we'll talk a little bit about eForce today as well. An instructor with the Elite 11's Quarterback Training Academy, and I think more importantly, he's the parent of 2 young boys, and so he's going to get to be an expert today. But I'll be testing him later on in life as we go to see if he follows his own advice. It's not quite as easy as we make it sound. Alex, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, welcome back, and thank you for taking on all this time with us. Really enjoyed the first interview and excited to kind of explore some of the same topics, but I think it's a little bit different when we get to older kids. Before we do, for folks who don't know you or didn't listen to our first show, tell us about your background, kind of how you get to be the owner of eForce Sports and sitting in this room here with me today.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Eugene, Oregon, right down the road from University of Oregon. I was a 3-sport athlete growing up, primarily football, basketball, baseball, played a little soccer.
Oh, you played soccer?
Up until 5th grade. Yeah, I like to tell people I was the state's best goalie up until 5th grade. It's no big deal. But,
did you get an award for that? Or is that
self-imposed? But, it was, but I played for a pretty good club out of Eugene. And it was actually fun that after I gave up soccer, I got to follow all these kids that went on. They all played, most of them played collegiate soccer somewhere. And, that was kind of a remember when sort of situation for me. But no, played soccer till about 5th grade, picked up football in 6th grade. And didn't play quarterback, actually. Most of my middle school years kind of played, but didn't really play. And so, football really became my passion after my freshman year of high school. But, again, grew up in Eugene, went to Sheldon High School, and was really fortunate as a freshman to meet the head football coach there, Marty Johnson. And Marty, it was his 2nd year at Sheldon High School. He went on to coach there for 20 plus years, won multiple state titles. He was a huge impact. Him and the rest of the coaching staff, they're a huge impact on my life. And kind of made this decision as a freshman. I was a varsity freshman baseball player. My dad played collegiate baseball. So baseball was a big part of my life, and I was pretty good at it, to spend a little extra time between my freshman and sophomore year in the summer on football, because I wanted to be the varsity backup so bad, because I just love football. I had a great freshman football experience. And, for whatever reason, I decided to do that, and
that's something you don't hear every day. I want to be the varsity backup so bad.
Yeah. Again, it's like looking back, it's one of those things that, kind of fate inspired, it feels like. But, I ended up working really hard, that off season or that summer. I become the varsity backup to a returning starter who's going to be a senior quarterback. And that starter gets hurt like middle of the first quarter of middle of the second quarter of our first game. And so I go on to be a starting quarterback, play pretty well. We make a run to the playoffs, got a good team. I end up getting hurt in the quarterfinals. And then kind of from then on out, football was kind of my first sport. I still played football and basketball and baseball all the way through high school, but my mornings I was in the weight room working with the football team pretty much year round. Summers were all about football. We went on to state runner-ups my junior year, won the state title my senior year. I was Gatorade Player of the Year here in the state of Oregon, earned a scholarship opportunity to Washington State, and was a 4-year starter at Washington State after my redshirt season, and left there as the all-time leading passer, got drafted in the 7th round of the NFL draft by the Houston Texans, had a short stint there for a couple seasons, and then went up to Canada and was fortunate to play in the CFL for 5 years and had a fantastic experience. And as I wound down my professional playing career in 2014, I'd been training quarterbacks and coaching a little bit, decided coaching wasn't really for me. I had a business degree. I love the idea of entrepreneurship and business, and ultimately molded those two passions together and started E4 Sports with a good friend of mine, Ryan DePaulo. And that was 10 years ago now. And, we are multiple locations here in the state of Oregon, impacted thousands of athletes over the last 10 years. And you just feel very fortunate to have this platform, and obviously happy to be here.
You made a good decision that having the decisions of 18-year-olds impact your paycheck is one of those things that living through is a very difficult thing.
It's fair, but especially this day and age.
That's right. Well, I want to dive into the multi-sport thing. This is something, and I think is really, really important. How, and maybe you didn't have any issues with it, but how did you navigate? And if it was easier for you, how would you suggest a young person who's, really good at multiple sports, right? They have 2 really good programs, and they have 2 coaches or 3 coaches that really want their time. How, as both a student athlete or as a parent, do you navigate that kind of what could be precarious relationships with those coaches? And I mean, from a coaching standpoint, I would hope that all coaches would just say, we believe it's important that you are involved in both things. We're going to be as flexible as we can. We live in the real world. That doesn't happen, right, all the time. What is that? How do you have those conversations so that you don't feel like you have to choose something?
Well, there's a couple different, ways to think about it. I think I was very fortunate at Sheldon High School that we had the best version of what you're talking about, where, Marty Johnson's the head football coach, his brother, who's our defensive coordinator, Lane Johnson's the head basketball coach, and our defensive backs coach for football, Ben Johnson, who's unrelated to those two, was the head baseball coach. And one thing that we had was a morning 0 period strength and conditioning class that football player, really anybody could participate in, but football could, primarily it was for football athletes to be there, really all athletes. But so we did that, and we did that year round. And that was kind of an expectation that was set. I didn't really know it at the time, how valuable that was. But I will tell you that as I've now kind of transitioned to this role of sports specific development and athletic development, we touched on it, earlier in my first conversation with you about how I feel about strength and conditioning kind of being at the center of a lot of all athletic development versus, skill specific, shooting a basketball or throwing a football or hitting a baseball, right? It's all got to start with your, are you strong, powerful, fast? Are you able to prevent injury? All these sort of things, flexibility. So I had that advantage, right? And then the coaches did kind of work together. So, there wasn't a ton of push-pull. But I think, to your point, there's not always that level of cohesiveness, right? Particularly at the high school level amongst coaches. And so the most important thing is that you as an athlete and as a parent, right, you know what your goals are and what your needs are. Now, in the end, all those sports you're playing typically have some level of crossover where they're going to benefit you. If I'm a baseball player and I play football and I play basketball, I'm getting a lot out of that, right? The challenge is, and this is where, parents and athletes have to really think about, the development process is, you have to, if you don't have the setup like I have, where there's a weight class in the morning before school, and then practice is typically in the afternoons, and everybody kind of works through that, you have to figure out where that extra time goes. And that's the challenge, right? Because if you're in basketball season, you do need to be focused on your basketball team, right? Even if you're a high level football player,
of course.
If you're, and same goes for any other sport. And that's the expectation I think most coaches have. And the friction comes when it feels like your focus on the team is not quite there, right? But then in the off seasons, okay, it's figuring out where is that extra time go. And I think a lot of the mistakes sometimes is, or not even mistakes, it's just the realities of life, is that maybe you only have, for strength training time from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., Monday through Friday. And that conflicts with basketball practice, or the reality is sometimes, athletes are like, I don't really want to get up that early and go work out. And I would tell you, if you want to have success, and if that's you have big goals and aspirations, you need to find that extra time. Right. And I was lucky it was structured for me, but sometimes that friction happens where we're kind of trying to have our cake and eat it too, without making sacrifices, right? Like, mom and dad, like, if that's what your son wants and that's what you want for your son or daughter, you might have to get up early and take him to the gym at 6 a.m. Like, that might have to happen. Now, you don't have to by any means, but you will miss out on some of the development along the way. And so it's important, what your goals are, what you want out of it, that you're willing to sacrifice a little bit to find the extra time. Like, where is the extra time? Right. And then you got to have honest conversations with the coaches that you're working with about what your goals are and how you can, you're here for the team. I was all in on basketball when it was basketball season, but I was still lifting in the mornings, no matter what was happening in basketball, because I still needed to maintain strength and power and speed. And it wasn't really affecting my basketball. You'll have basketball.
It was helping you.
Yeah. And you'll have basketball coaches that are like, don't do leg day on a basketball game day. It's like, stop.
I
Like,
think basketball coaches have gotten through that.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But my point is that everybody needs to understand that you are spending time on whatever kind of your primary sport is, but it's not sacrificing from the team and from what's happening in that moment.
I think it's great points. And I just one thing from a coach's standpoint, we all been talking about athletes and being an athlete and doing the athlete thing, right? Making baskets, throwing balls, catching balls, kicking balls. But there's so much more that can come from athletics than just playing the sport, right? It's that lesson and that classroom for life that you can learn from. And someday, a young person's going to need a raise, a promotion, have a problem with a coworker or their boss. And I just feel like as a parent, it's that opportunity first to have your young athlete have conversations with their coach about their future. Like, I want to play two sports, coach basketball, coach soccer. I need to talk to both of you and make sure that you understand from me what's important to me, hear your expectations, and then figure out how to do that.
Sure.
And if you can use that experience as a multi-sport athlete to begin having that nervous conversation, because it's nerve-wracking. Walk into coach's office and say, hey, this is important to me. This is my life. This is what I want to do. And be able to get that lesson, it's going to help you later on in life. And then as the parent, once that kid's had an opportunity to do that, and then the coach doesn't value that, that's the opportunity then where the parent can come in and step in instead of just trying to be overbearing and lead it from the beginning. I think that those conversations preemptively early in the kid's career, opening that dialogue and teaching them how to have those conversations with their coaches is critical. You played 3 sports, but you were dedicated to football, right? Like that. Yeah. I've heard you say this over and over again, and we're going to dive into this in just a little bit more in a second. But before we get into the sport part of it, time management's critical to this, right? So as a parent, maybe it came naturally to you in the way your schedule was and the way that worked. But for folks who are, there's busy lives, right? Stuff's going on all over the place.
No doubt.
How do you incorporate that time management component into a young kid's lives? And do you guys talk about that at eForce with your kids when they come in, or what's that component like?
Well, I think, first and foremost, there's a layer that, we're not touching on because it's not the focus, but, the idea of time management ties into school, right? Because like you're not doing anything in sports without taking care of business.
They're called student athletes,
sure.
right? Yep.
Yeah. Without taking care of business in the classroom. So there's that time management, like typically what that is, you're spending time, you're obviously at school, and then typically in the evening, there's an element of schoolwork associated with that. You have your sport practices. So that's where, as an athlete, and I would tell you this, from the time you get into high school, typically until, if you're lucky enough to play in college, you're trying to figure out how I fit my schoolwork around my practices and my actual classes and all these sort of things. So, high school is a great opportunity. Anytime parents and kids are like, but I gotta study for a test and I got all these things. It's like, definitely, you definitely have to do that. But you also have your sports specific practice you probably got to go to. And so you got to figure out how to balance that, and so it does cut out, some time for, things you may want to do or could do. I think
learn how to sacrifice.
I think there is a very honest conversation that sometimes people don't want to have around, there are some binary choices. You either want to do this, and we're moving on to, you want to be great.
Yeah.
You either want to be great or you don't want to make the sacrifice to do it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there's elements of balance, but there's also some elements of, hey, maybe you do have to get up at 6 a.m. to get your workout in. And then you got school, and then you got your sport, your in-season sport, and then you got schoolwork. And so you don't have time to go hang out with your friends or something else. And so I think being able to have honest conversations about time management also sometimes means sacrifice. It means making some tough choices at times. And I think that's where we can help kind of lead young people and where the conversation comes in. Because what I find often in what we do is that, athletes have, big dreams and big aspirations and big goals, but their process and their approach doesn't align, and their actions don't align with those goals. And that's when you have to have honest conversations about, well, if you want to do these things, that I would encourage all young people to set goals and have a high bar that they're trying to reach. But if your actions aren't matching those goals, then, it's going to be really hard as a coach or as a mentor or as a parent, right, to help you get there.
I agree. I said it all the time in this way. Everybody wants to be great.
Sure.
But what are you willing to do to be great?
Yeah.
Right? You got to separate. I want to, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And those conversations can happen from parent to young person to really help in that development process. It's a great place to take a break. We will be right back with Alex Brink right after this. Welcome back to the Next Pitch podcast, joined by Alex Brink, former NFL quarterback, amongst many other things that he's done in his life, owner of E4 Sports in the Portland metro area. And we are talking about today sort of the high school student athlete. What does it look like to be a multi-sport athlete? We've covered that. I want to really dive into, while not, every kid can do this, I think there's still benefit in trying to become elite. And if you fail, you talked about some earlier, kind of about some of the failures being learning experiences too. But what is, you got a kid that comes to you, right? Sophomore in high school, freshman in high school, has this goal of being elite. I know kind of your belief that being a multi-sport athlete is a critical part of being elite. I think people don't necessarily think like that most of the time. I need to be elite. I'm done with everything else. I'd love for you to kind of lay out that game plan of, kind of that holistic approach to becoming an elite athlete with the goals of being recruited at a high level, whether they reach it or not, but that's our goal. And we think we have that potential to do that.
Yeah, there's, to be honest, the playbook can be pretty simple, but I would break it into kind of three different buckets to some degree. there's the skill specific. So if I want to be a great, and I'll use quarterback as an example because, that's what I was. That's what I coach at a high level. I'm around the best of the best at the high school level through the Elite 11 every summer. It starts with, skill development. I have to be skilled at my sport, right? Like I have to know how to throw a football. I have to meet certain levels. And I always talk about a threshold, right? Like, are you above the threshold physically and fundamentally in your sport? It doesn't have to be perfect, right? Not everybody throws the football the same, but a lot of them have similar qualities kind of in that band above the threshold. And so, are you putting the work, from a skill development standpoint, right? So you need to spend time on that, right?
Can we just put a pin in and not go to the next two yet? So this is so good. So this is really kind of the culture in America around AAU sports and club sports, right? Is we got to play a lot of games.
Sure.
And we forget that when we get to college, and I'll use basketball here, when we get to college, we practice 30 times in 40 days before we play our first game. Then we practice for another week, work on what we weren't very good at, and play again. And within that, it's practice and skill development and working on all the things that go into being a player. And then in the off season, you spend 7 months out of the season all on skill development.
In youth sports, we just want to go play games. So that skill development piece and that component
is something that I do not think can ever be overstated. When you're looking for a program, the first thing you want to ask after you find out if they're good people or not is, what is your core values of your program? Are you whether you're going to be elite or you're just playing on, this is high school sports, like you want to find a place that's skill development. So you just used 2 words that trigger me. I apologize. But I think to start with that is so critical, because that is the base component. Whatever sport you're playing is developing the things that actually help you play in those games. Not playing games is not what does that for you. So anyway, keep going. My apologies.
No, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, I think there's a stat, I'm going to butcher the stat, but it's like, 7-to-1 when it comes to like a practice to game ratio or 8-to-1, something like that, right? Is like what you're trying to achieve along the way. And so, again, are you skilled? So if you want to be elite, you need to go figure out who is going to help you become skilled, because very few people are just naturally born with the ability to shoot a basketball perfectly, right? Steph Curry trained it over years, right? We know the Tiger Woods story around his swing development. It takes years. So hopefully you're not figuring that out as a freshman or sophomore, because you're probably too late. So the skill development aspect should start early. Generally that happens kind of naturally in your sport journey. And then you would need to find what gets you over the hump, right? The vast majority of elite level quarterbacks I know have spent time around some version of high level quarterback coach to give them the skills they need. So that I think that's to start with. Like, I got to have the skills. Second, and probably most importantly, even if you have the skills, even if you know how to throw a football, is the physical development. And that's the part where I feel like a ton of parents miss early on and athletes miss early on, is getting the base of the physical development.
And
right?
this translates to any sport, right? Like this is
no doubt.
This is the same thing, whether you're a volleyball player, water polo player, lacrosse, it does not matter.
Doesn't matter.
It's that physical development.
Yeah. Are you, again, and I'm using broad terms here, but are you strong? Are you fast? Are you powerful? Are you flexible? Right? Can you prevent injuries? Like all these things. And that only comes, right? There's a select few people in the population that are just naturally born big, strong, athletic humans. Most of everybody else develops those qualities, right? Like LeBron looked different than most people early in his life. I mean, you and I both remember watching the high school basketball games on ESPN. Right, he looked different, and at there's different levels of sport, and there's exceptions to the rule at times, but the rule for pretty much everybody else is, are you physically developed? And the best athletes, the most elite athletes that I've been around, have spent time in the weight room and focusing on performance and strength training at an early age, so that typically when you look at them as juniors and seniors in high school, you can tell that they've spent time in the weight room, they look stronger, they look more developed in a healthy way and in an age appropriate way, but it takes work and it takes time. And that's the hard part that I think parents and athletes, if they start too late, they're like, well, I need to put on 15 pounds, if I'm a football player, or I need to increase my vertical jump as a volleyball player. Well, that doesn't happen in 3 months, right? It happens in 3 years. And so you need to have that. That has to be the focus of, you're developing your skills, but I can teach anybody to throw a football, Anthony. I've taught you how to throw a football, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, if you're not strong, right, and fast and powerful, then it doesn't matter. Right, in football and really any other sport. So it also helps you stand out if we're talking about recruiting and those sort of things. If you look, appropriately physically developed and you're ahead of the curve instead of like a young Alex Brink who was 6'2", 170 pounds and looked like he ran cross country, as people at Washington State love to tell you. If you're behind the development curve, it can be a challenge, all right, physically. So you have those two things.
That's pretty funny to think Wazoo was doing tryouts with the cross country team to find their quarterback.
Exactly. So you've got, you got skill development. Okay. Are you skilled at your sport? Have you spent time on it? Are you elite? Then your physical development. Okay. Are you physically developed? Are you ahead of the curve? And then kind of that third component that has been talked about a ton in the last, 6 or 8 years that I think is fantastic and super important is kind of the emotional and mental aspect of the game. And that's where I go back to a lot of things that, it can be very specific. It can be sports psychology and tools around, how to kind of manage your mental health. I think it can also be as simple as what I talked about the first time we talked, which was, do I have something else outside of sport that I'm passionate about or I can put my attention on? Do I play the guitar? When things are hard playing quarterback, can I go play the guitar and just get away, right? Do I participate in an extracurricular activity that's not sport? Right? Yeah. Am I on the debate club? Do I have something else? And what I find that does is it provides a balance for elite level athletes when things aren't going very well.
Yeah.
It helps with that mental load, in all honesty. And so, kind of that mental, the emotional side of it. Are you understanding that even as an elite athlete with big goals and dreams and expectations and outcomes, that process is the most important thing? And if you've been taught that all along the way and it's not about outcomes, then when things don't go your way, you're able to manage that better and kind of go through it. So that a mental, emotional piece, if you're a parent or an athlete, if you're trying to be elite, you need to seek out the tools to be able to manage that side of it. And I think there's tons of great resources out there nowadays, tons of great people in the sports psychology space and the mental performance space that I think would be of really high value for elite athletes. I think if you can hit those 3 buckets, then typically if you hit those 3 buckets, the actual execution on the field, because you can't get recruited if you're not good on the field. Typically, if you hit those 3 buckets, your execution on the field or the court or wherever in the pool, whatever it is, takes care of itself.
Yeah.
And at that point, if you followed that recipe of all 3 of those things, which means time and effort, sacrifice, and you maximize those things, and you have kind of the base level of physical attributes for your sport, right? Yeah. If you're tall enough in basketball or big enough to be an offensive lineman or whatever, then you'll typically get the opportunities you're hoping for.
So I having, raised a couple kids and different points of the process here, I find myself being better the second time around than I was the first time around, as I am with pretty much everything that I do in life. But as a parent, and you recognize that you might have an elite athlete, right? You might not, but you recognize that. What would you recommend parents' involvement in that piece be, right? I have a firm belief that the parents can't drive it. If the parent drives it, then it's not the kid reaching their maximum potential, and they need the assistance. But I think, either agree with me, disagree with me, and give me more here. But that you find out what the kid wants and what their goals are, and then you figure out how to help them hold themselves accountable to that. What is your advice to parents as you see you're around elite athletes all the time in the parent relationship? What is your advice to them?
I think the first thing is typically the parent can be this, but I think sometimes athletes appreciate when it comes from a third party is if the parent can find, an appropriate kind of mentor or mentors that can, help that athlete set goals and a plan, or go find other people that can help that athlete formulate a plan, it can be really powerful. If mom or dad is like, okay, said athlete wants to go be a professional, wants to make the Olympics in volleyball, and that's their goal. And then mom and dad create the plan and they're doing it. It's like, it's not what I've seen. It's not quite as impactful, because it feels like, right, as an athlete, you're kind of getting talked at and told what to do. Whereas if it comes from a third party, a trusted third party, right, it feels like there's another layer to that. One of the best experiences I ever had with a young athlete and parents is, and I actually think this was driven, if I remember correctly, from school, was an 8th grader was given the task to pick a mentor and then set a goal for the end of high school. And and then they were supposed to meet with the mentor, set the goals, and every year check in to see if they were reaching the goals that they had set for themselves. And this athlete, as an 8th grader, told me he wanted to play running back at Stanford. And this was in the era of like Christian McCaffrey. And I remember being like, a good youth athlete, not otherworldly, but good youth athlete. And I said, okay, like, love that you have this goal. Like, I appreciate you, looking to me as a mentor. Here's what that process looks like if we were to work backwards. Well, first and foremost, you need to be probably a 4.0, maybe better if your school allows it. You need to have XYZ extracurriculars and AP classes and all the things. So let's start there, because you want to go to Stanford. And then let's do the football stuff, and here's what it takes. Here are the physical attributes. Here are the things. Here are the gates along the way, right? Like here's what you need to hit as a freshman. Here's what you need to do as a sophomore. Here's what you and like, we laid the whole thing out. And to this athlete's credit, laser focused without being kind of overbearing, parents that supported in whatever ways they could. And I mean, when I talk about checking boxes, like, we check the boxes, check the boxes, check the boxes. Gets to the end of it, we're at the process. He's a senior in high school. He's got plenty of offers, a lot of them, good ones, like high level, Pac-12, wherever. Didn't have Stanford, but he had he had all of it, right? You're kind of like, dude, like, man, you handled it, right? And he felt good about it, and the parents felt good about it. It was he handled the process really well. Lo and behold, out of nowhere, late in the recruiting process, Stanford comes in and offers him. He ends up going to Stanford and getting to play running back at Stanford. That's amazing. And and again, like, a lot of that's like the back end of that. A lot of that's kind of happenstance and luck, and the way the recruiting process works, which is 18 podcasts in and of itself.
We're going to cover it.
But my point is, if you are a parent of a young athlete, your role should be to vet mentors and people that can help your athlete set goals and a plan and a process to track them, hold them accountable. And your job is to facilitate that along the way. And because you know what's best for your athlete and your son or daughter, and you can be that kind of, that gatekeeper. But it shouldn't just be about you all the time. And the best versions of it is having somebody else that you trust and the athlete trusts that can help them through that process.
So good. Makes me feel better, because that's sort of how we're doing it with our son. You're never going to get it exactly right, but you want to, if there's some sort of thought process behind it. And I'm sure there's lots of parents out there that hear this, that are doing these kind of things, that just need to hear some validation.
Sure. And
some that aren't, that are like, oh my God, this can help me.
Yeah.
We only have a couple minutes left here. I do this, kind of wrapping this up here, do this with everybody as we start the show. I'm going to do this with everyone. But I used to have my players build a crystal ball and put themselves into the future. We did this with you as a youth, but now we're going to do it as a high school player. If you had a crystal ball and you could take it backwards, Not forwards, but backwards. What would Alex Brink today tell 16-year-old Alex Brink?
Figure out your nutrition, man. Like figure out how to eat better and eat right. And again, speaking about high school athletics and trying to be an elite athlete, again, like I was this tall, skinny kid, and I would hit the weight room. We joked in the previous podcast I was with you, we joked about soda. My experience, I would every morning, like we had a great strength and conditioning program and in high school. Like I was there pretty much every morning. I'd get done. I'd go to the school store and I'd buy Dr. Pepper and like
Snickers bar.
Yeah. Like legitimately. And then I wonder why I was never like gaining weight and my strength was kind of always, so like, I didn't really have, the mentors like that. Great high school coaches that helped me out and that were fantastic. A mom and dad that were supportive of my sport journey, but like there was another layer there that I didn't quite have. And, in 2099, 2000, 2001, 2002, there wasn't quite the focus on it. And I think that's, that's if I had the crystal ball, I'd go back because, a lot of my under recruitment, which I was very under recruited.
You look like a cross country guy.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't look the part.
Love cross country guys, by the way, but they look different than quarterbacks.
100%, no doubt. And so, I'm the Gatorade State Player of the Year in football. I'm I'm one of the all-time leading passers in the state, like state champion, like all these things, and at one point, Boise State's my best offer, Idaho, Portland State, and then I kind of fall into Washington State, right? Got lucky, I like to say, but so like that, like as an athlete, like dude, just hammer that.
Hammer your nutrition.
I had my mom was in education, so I was really locked into school. Like, I'm very thankful for that. A good circle of friends, like handled that really, really, really right. But, when it came to the athletic piece of it, I missed that. And it affected my, I got these opportunities moving forward. But even when I got to the NFL, man, like Gary Kubiak, the head coach of the Houston Texans, looked at me one day in the cafeteria and goes, "Hey man, you got to eat more." And I was like, I'm a professional football player and he's telling me I got to eat more. I was 210 pounds. Like I wasn't close. I knew it. And like, I didn't figure it out till too late. My last 2-3 years of my career in the CFL where I was like locked in. So that was it for me. And that's very specific to everybody.
It's a great answer. And we're actually going to spend a ton of time talking about nutrition as we go with one of your guys. All right. Last thing today, I'll do this with everyone as well. You're a parent. I need your best dad joke, man. I want your best dad joke. I know you think you're not funny.
I know,
but no dad joke is funny until a dad's telling it. So go ahead.
Well, it was very important to me that I could present myself as funny after embarrassing myself the first time around. So I came ready for this one.
All right, hit me up.
Anthony, why should you never fight a dinosaur?
God, I feel like I should know the answer to this. I feel how have I never heard this one? Okay, I don't know.
Because you get your ass kicked.
The funniest part of the dad joke is probably me listening to the dad joke. They just kill me. I don't know why, but I am all in. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. I going to end this today with, just the same advice that I'm going to give over and over again and have given over and over again. No matter where your child is in their student athlete journey, the relationship with the kid is the most important piece of this. And if you can learn to just after a game, tell your kid, I love you and I love watching you play, I think your relationship with your child can change immensely around that sport that they're playing. Again, thank you, Alex Brink, an amazing guest. On behalf of our producer, Jason Cardona, I'm Anthony Leverts. We'll see you next time.